welcome to my top 10 saxophone movies list. Now, these are definitely my favorites, and let me start off by saying this is not a list of documentaries or docu-dramas. So movies like Bird, Around Midnight, Miles, Chasing the Train, Saxophone Colossus, stuff like that, that's going to be on a different list of saxophone documentaries or docu-dramas. This is just going to have movies that star fictional characters that just so happen to be saxophone players, and how well the writers were able to incorporate the saxophone player into their fictional tale. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so let's get to it. Tied for number 10, ladies and gentlemen, we got The Lost Boys and The Muppet Movie. Now, The Muppet Movie is one of my it's in my top 5 all-time favorite movies. And The Lost Boys is definitely one of my top favorite vampire movies. So let's start with The Lost Boys. If you haven't seen this is kind of the vampire movie of the 1980s, up there with Fright Night. So you have to check out the saxophone scene that's in this. It's got the guy with his shirt off. He's got like this chain thing, and he's playing this saxophone. Now, obviously, he's not a starring character in this movie, but that scene is just extraordinarily memorable. And a lot of people, when they think back on this movie, they think of that guy out there. It's fun to go watch him now because he's still out there doing it. Okay, and The Muppet Movie just features Zoot, who got his name from Zoot Sims, and he got his look from actually Gato Barbieri. I love The Muppet Movie. The music in it is fantastic. Clearly, Zoot isn't a starring character, but they really capture a certain aspect of saxophone players in this movie. Definitely one of my favorites. Okay, let's move on to number 9. Coming in at number 9, ladies and gentlemen, is one of my all-time favorite movies as a kid. I still watch this movie regularly now, called Explorers. Now, the saxophone player in this movie is actually an alien, and he's got this weird alien saxophone thing with all of this stuff on it. It's such a bizarre scene, but it's so perfect that this alien from outer space has this space saxophone thing, and he's playing Little Richard music, rock and roll. It's one of the best scenes, and that character is actually kind of a star. I think it's maybe Howie Mandel.
Robert Picardo!
I can't remember, but
Robert Picardo!
It's one of my favorite aliens in any kind of alien thing, up there with Alf. Explorers, coming in at number 9. Check that one out. Coming in at number 8, ladies and gentlemen, we got the Blues Brothers, and I'm going to include the Blues Brothers 1 and 2. But for 1, we got Lou Marini, and 2, there's a whole bunch of other saxophone players in this. But just the fact that they got a real professional saxophone player, Lou Marini, to be in this movie just says a whole lot. I really love it when they do that, and I would have liked to have seen more of him in that movie, get him a speaking part in that whole bit, but you can't go wrong with the Blues Brothers. I do want to reinforce the fact that this is my favorites, and some of these which I think are the best in terms of just completely fictional characters. Also, it's not about how good the movie is, and it's more about how well they incorporate a saxophonist into the movie and how accurate they get stuff that relates to us as saxophone players. Okay, coming in at number 7, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are older, this movie is definitely before my time. This is definitely the oldest movie on this list, and black and white, starring Marilyn Monroe, who is fantastic in this movie, Tony Curtis, Jack Lemmon, George Raft. Some like it hot. Tony Curtis is the saxophone player. This is probably considered to be one of the best comedies ever made, at least for its era anyway, and the fact that it stars a character that's a saxophone player. I would have loved if that character if the movie would have reflected the character more as a saxophone player instead of more of just a guy on the run. But nonetheless, it's got some great music in it. The movie is very entertaining, but I would have needed more of the saxophone player's life in that whole thing for a list like this anyway. But at any rate, the movie is fantastic. One of the funniest lines in this movie as a saxophone player is Marilyn Monroe is just going on about how she's just so giddy for a saxophone player, especially a tenor saxophone player, when he plays, Come to Me, My Melancholy Baby. And I just got this weird idea that back then when this movie came out, every saxophone playing dude out there went and learned that song just to try and be impressive to Marilyn Monroe. But all right, let's move on. Coming in at number 6, ladies and gentlemen, we got from the Spike Lee library, Mo Better Blues. Now, the movie actually stars Denzel Washington as a trumpet player and co-stars Wesley Snipes. But from here on, we're really getting into movies that are really focusing on the musician side of it. This movie is fantastic, a little tragic. I'm not going to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it, but the score is fantastic. Branford Marsalis is actually playing the music for this. Mo Better Blues, got to check that one out. All right, let's move on to number 5. But before we do, let's take a break, ladies and gentlemen. Coming in at number 5, ladies and gentlemen, starring 2 heavy hitters in the world of entertainment, we got Robert De Niro and Liza Minnelli in New York, New York, where Robert De Niro is our saxophone player. This is definitely a staple that you gotta have in your movie viewing library, ladies and gentlemen. I don't really want to spoil any of it, but apparently Robert De Niro really went out of his way to kind of learn the saxophone, and it is very much appreciated. Even watching it, trying to watch how the fingers line up, which is big to me. Whenever I see a saxophone player in anything, I'm always trying to see if the music is actually lining up with how the person is moving their fingers. But you guys got to check out New York, New York. I think they mostly get it okay enough, but it's not okay. But New York, New York at number 5. All right, let's move on. Coming in at number 4, ladies and gentlemen, and we are really getting into like the meat of it, because these characters are actually starring heavily, or there's something really significant that really sets these movies apart. So coming in at number 4, ladies and gentlemen, I love this movie. It's a real sweetheart of a movie, but Heaven Can Wait. I'm talking about the Warren Beatty version. Warren Beatty is actually a professional athlete. He's a professional American football player, and he gets into a car accident, dies. That theme is going to come back on this list, by the way. Gets to heaven and realizes that they made a mistake, but he's kind of a part-time saxophone player. The thing is, in this movie, he's actually much more of a soprano saxophone player than anything. The score is fantastic in this movie, and if I'm not mistaken, Dave Grusin actually did the music for this movie. And it's nice to hear a movie with a soprano saxophone score lead before the Kenny G era, because it's a different kind of sound, but I think it fits this movie perfectly. And the way they incorporate his saxophone playing into this is really, really good. Now I'm going to spoil this a little bit because it's kind of tragic, and I really wish they hadn't done this, but by the end of it, he's not a saxophone player anymore, and I'm just like, oh, come on, man. Definitely one of the better movies on this list. Very, very enjoyable, but you definitely got to check out Heaven Can Wait. His soprano saxophone playing is actually quite hilarious, and I think he may have actually learned a little bit of how to play on this. So if you did, mad props to you, Warren Beatty. Okay, let's move to number 3. Coming in at number 3, I'm telling you right now, ladies and gentlemen, I am so glad I waited to do this list until after this movie came out. Definitely the newest movie that's on this list, which is Disney Pixar's Soul. This movie is a straight up love letter to anyone who is a jazz musician or Black American, or especially a Black American jazz musician, because it's just like, I can't believe they put that much detail into the fine details of cultural things. I mean, it's It's such a beautiful thing to watch. It's a fantastic movie. It's getting a lot of high reviews. And this list isn't really about how good a movie is. But with all of that being said, let's move to the saxophone player, because the character who's a saxophone player is really a small role. It's a character called Dorothea Williams, and she has all the sassy black woman characteristics that you want to make her character very entertaining. And let me tell you right now, what they were able to do with so little time and what little scenes she's actually in is just fantastic in developing that character. And the thing that I like the most about that character is that they actually took the time in this animated film to get the fingerings correct, playing the right notes. I went through it with my saxophone and the keyboard, and the main character, Joe, who's the piano player. They got all of that. They took the time to sync it to make sure that the fingerings are playing the right note. I mean, it brings a whole nother level of realism to this. The music is just superb. It's like for real jazz. It's mixed well, the whole bit. It's fantastic. So definitely check out Soul. Love this movie. And a really nice representation of a sassy black woman saxophone player. They could have just as easily made her a singer, but they made her a saxophone player. And believe me, thank you, Pixar, for that one. Okay, let's move on, ladies and gentlemen. Coming in at number 2, absolutely, positively, hands down, the worst movie on this list. This movie is awful. And if they had actually billed it as a comedy, I think it would go down as one of the best bad movie comedies of all time. This movie is called Play Murder for Me. It's actually a type of soap opera, drama, murder mystery. You know, whenever you think of those murder mysteries and it's got the private dick and you got the minor 6/9 chords all over the place, it's supposed to be one of these kind of movies. But instead, it's just chock full of all the horrible stereotypes about saxophone players and jazz musicians. I mean, this movie, oh my God, it's so bad. I have a secret love affair with fun, bad movies. And believe me, this one is in my top 5. It's up there with Troll 2, The Room, Toxic Avenger 1. Toxic Avenger 4 is my absolute all-time favorite bad movie ever. Oh my God, they actually threw money at Toxic Avenger 4. They got Ron Jeremy in it. I mean, Ron Jeremy is in Toxic Avenger 4, man. Oh my God, you have to. In fact, go watch it and then comment back to me after you think about it. If you watch Toxic Avenger 1, make sure you watch the unedited version because it's so over the top and ridiculous. Wow. But at any rate, this Play Murder for Me, it's just, man, the saxophone playing in it is pretty awful. It's not awful, it's just really, really average. There's one scene near the end where it's actually pretty good. And the dude just berates him for it. And he's like, yeah, man, I guess I haven't made it by now. Anyway, definitely one of my all-time favorite movies ever. Play Murder for Me. The saxophone player is the star of this movie. I love that movie. Definitely check that one out. I think it's on YouTube for now. Anyway, okay, ladies and gentlemen, enough messing around. But before we get to number 1, let's take a break. Coming in at number 1, ladies and gentlemen, I used to watch this movie a little bit when I was a kid, kind of right around the time I became a saxophone player. I was watching this movie, not really understanding the little details of it. But I watched it because Robin Williams was in it. Always been a Robin Williams fan, but Moscow on the Hudson. I actually ordered this movie like 2.5 months ago, and I'm really glad I waited to make this because this movie is probably hands down the best saxophone movie starring a fictional saxophone character that's ever been made. It's really, really good in the way they actually show you the inside life of not just an immigrant coming from another country to try and make it in the big city as a musician, like all of those tropes, but they really do focus on keeping that character a musician. They lean pretty heavily on the whole foreigner immigrant coming to the US to make a new life for himself thing, but they do something really, really slick in this movie, and it's the best way you can do it. They keep you grounded in this character being a musician by having a fantastic soundtrack. If you check out this movie, I highly advise you to listen to it with headphones, because the mix of the music is just really, really good. And if I'm not mistaken, all the music in the score of this movie is all saxophone led, and I believe it's all tenor saxophone led. And as they are progressing you through this character's life, it's a little ambiguous about how much time is taken from one scene to the next in that regard, but they change the music. It's not just jazz. They kind of change it in such a way that as the music progresses, you see the progression of the character. And that's their way of keeping you grounded in this character being a musician. I don't want to spoil it for you or anything like that, but it really, just the way they've handled this movie, the acting, the comedy, the effort that Robin Williams put into actually learning to speak Russian well enough. I mean, I'm sure there's some Russian speakers out there that are like, pfft. But he took the time to learn to speak Russian well enough to sell this movie as well as he does. One big complaint, whenever it goes to him actually playing the saxophone, the music is fantastic, but it's clearly that overdubbed kind of thing. Like they did with Audrey Hepburn and My Fair Lady. There was a lot of like controversy about whether they should have got Julie Andrews to do that, but Audrey Hepburn was a bigger star. Then you notice in Breakfast at Tiffany's, Audrey Hepburn sings the parts herself. It's beautiful. But Moscow on the Hudson, man, it's done the best, I think, of any movie. Number one on this list, ladies and gentlemen, Moscow on the Hudson. Definitely one you want to check out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I like doing these top 10s for you, so I'm going to keep stuff like this coming, along with the normal stuff that I do with saxophone technique and product reviews, all of that stuff. So thanks for tuning in. See ya!